You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at keeleycompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the #1 national best-selling author of the book On Fire. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, and he's the host of the Live Inspired podcast. John interviews extraordinary individuals on their life story so that you can wake up from accidental living and more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. If you've been doing life with us for any length of time at all on this episode, on these shows that we put in front of you a couple times each week, you'll recognize that frequently when I bring a guest on, I do this long-winded read on of their bio, of where they've been, of what they've achieved, of the lives they've impacted. And yet today, I'm going to do a lot less introduction around our guest and a little bit more around what it might mean for you. If you want to learn more about overcoming adversity, if you want to learn more about achieving the impossible, if you want to learn more about setting big, mighty goals in your life and saying yes to the opportunities, even in the midst of failure, if you want to say yes to being driven by a purpose bigger than yourself, to recognizing the beauty in the broken, and ultimately to achieving a life of mighty significance, our guest has an awful lot to say about those topics today. He will be your guide on the journey. He will be your Sherpa as we climb together. He will be your friend by the end of it because he's already mine. His name is Jeff Glasbrenner. He is a mighty man. He's an awesome explorer. He's a phenomenal father. And he's our guest today on the Live Inspired podcast. So Jeff, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you.
Jeff, if that long read in front of our listeners today wasn't in front of them and they were to bump into you in Little Rock, Arkansas, or somewhere in the middle of where they live and where you live, and they said, Jeff, tell me about you, how would you respond to that question?
I would say I'm a father first and foremost. I'm a person that likes to set big goals, and I like to challenge people more than anything.
They'll probably say, tell me more about that. And they'll probably challenge you on that goal, man. Have you achieved any mighty goals in your life?
I've summited Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth. I've done all 7 summits. I've also skied to the South Pole. I'm a 3-time Paralympian, a 2-time world champion in wheelchair basketball. I have a world scoring record in wheelchair basketball, 63 points and 27 rebounds in that game. And then, I've a 25-time Ironman finisher, and I've done 55 full marathons. I've done a couple 50-mile races, and I've failed at a couple 100-mile races. So yeah, that's still on my list.
What I love about you is not only are you a failure in some of those races, but you do it with a smile on your face and a resolve to try again. You're not batting 1,000. There are swings and misses along the way, and yet this desire then to get back up and to move forward. And I think that is part of what attracts me so much to your heart, to your story, to your life. And one thing you did not mention is this inflection points as a child that sets you on a path, first of profound adversity, and then ultimately of these incredible successes you've achieved. So let's go back in time. Let's leave the Himalayas. Let's leave the South Pole. Let's even leave Little Rock, Arkansas for a while. And let's go back to the family farm. Talk about your upbringing.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small farming community in the southwest part of Wisconsin. I grew up on a farm. I was a farm boy. And so whatever my dad did, I helped him out, tagged along and, did whatever he did. I was his shadow for sure. Until one day, July 30th, 1980, a day that I will never forget, a day that I still celebrate every year. It's the day that I lost my leg. I was helping my dad out on the farm and we hit a rock. And my dad asked me to go what I've done hundreds of times before, remove the rock and get back onto my safe spot so we could continue on. And before I got to my safe spot, my dad turned on the machine and it took my leg off right below the knee. The best way I can describe it was like a pencil sharpener ground my leg off, if you will.
Some people, when they go through adversity like that, tragedy, it's hollowed out. They never remember what happened. They just wake up. And the others, and I know you're one of them, have minute details of that moment. Like,
Yeah.
talk about what you remember, man.
I remember everything. I remember it just being a really cool day and just happy to be with my dad on the tractor, really happy to be helping him out. And then all of a sudden, when that accident happened, it took me from the left-hand side of the tractor to the right-hand side of the tractor, just flung me and threw me. And I just remember looking down at my leg and I could just see bones sticking out where, a few seconds earlier, I was a normal kid. And then
Right.
I remember looking to my right and I could see my shoe about 10 feet away. And I was like, what is this? What's going on? And then I just remember crying, not because I was, really worried about what was going on at that moment, but I was thinking about all the things that I couldn't do. I started thinking about, my favorite things were running and swimming. I just remember crying to my dad, I'll never be able to run. I'll never be able to swim. And I just remember him looking me in the eyes and saying, son, let's just deal with this first and we'll worry about all the rest of that stuff at a different time. And I just remember him being so calm and collective in that moment of like chaos. And
Yes.
yeah, and then I remember going to the neighbor's house that was closest to us, and their car never ever started ever. It was a kind of dilapidated car, if you will. And then that day it started, so they took me to the hospital, so we wouldn't have to wait for the ambulance. And I think that
Your father saved your life too by putting the tourniquet on. Is that
yeah, the human hand tourniquet, he did. And so, with the doctors later on would say that without my dad responding very quickly like that, that I wouldn't have made it. It was really amazing to see him being so calm in that absolute horrible moment.
I know we're fast forwarding a little bit, but your father and you really never ever talked about this.
Yeah, no.
Talk about that both from the perspective of a child, you're 8, you're in his arms, and of course you're not going to be talking about it right then. But even as you grew through your teenage 20s and beyond, dad never wanted to talk about it. Talk about that.
I really believe that he grew up in a different era. You didn't really talk about your feelings. You didn't really talk about like that stuff, that personal stuff. You just kind of dealt with it internally. So all the time I try to bring it up. Hey, Dad, can we talk about that day? And then he'd change the subject. How are the Brewers doing? Or how are the Badgers doing? What about the Packers? So he'd always change that subject. And for me, that was always kind of hard because I'd never had any like ill will towards him or anything like that. But I just really wanted to know what that day was like for him. And it wasn't until years later that I became a father that I truly understand some of what he felt and all of that. So that was kind of hard to deal with. But I didn't really get to talk about that until years later with my dad. We had a brief little moment. He actually passed away of cancer, is dealing with some of that. And he was having a good day or a good week. And so I'm like, Dad, let's go out to Colorado. That was always his favorite thing to do. And I'm like, oh, this will be a perfect time so I can talk about him about my day,
Right.
And he was doing okay in the hotel room. I got enough courage again to ask him, how that day was. And he said, son, I know you had to go through a lot and I'm super proud of you. But he goes, after that, he just wouldn't talk about it. So I told him that it's an accident. It can happen to any of us at any time. So
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for just making it so real. So this dad whose boy is on his lap and gets down to remove the rock, he eventually gets stuck beneath equipment, rips off his leg, could have bled out on the field, puts the tourniquet on, races you to the neighbor. The car starts up and on begins this journey. I think you're in the hospital for 47 days.
yes, and so that was a long time, just being away from my home, and so just trying to fight and try to discover who I was going to be because every time I'd look down, I'd see all these bandages, and I was like, this is not me, I kept I'm like,
Right.
how can I walk? How can I do anything? I think after that, it kind of really came to reality. Is like when I was sent home, but I had the best piece of advice ever to my parents that were given. When I was getting ready to leave the hospital after spending those 47 days, my favorite nurse took my parents aside. His name was Peter. And he said to my parents, he goes, the biggest enemy of a kid with a disability are their parents. He said,
Hold on. I'm not going to let you off the hook because this one's not for farm kids in
no,
Wisconsin.
no.
This one is for every single parent, teacher, nurse, granny, neighbor with a kid in their life who they love. Will you say that one more time?
Yeah. So he said the biggest enemy of a kid with a disability are their parents. He said you can either choose to let them, discover life on their own, or you can choose to do everything for them. He goes, I encourage you to let them discover how they want to be and how they want to go forward. Because, I just remember like months later, my mom, was struggling with that. She wanted to make things easier for me. She wanted to hand me whatever or open the door or wait on me hand and foot, if you will, because it would be
Yeah.
easier. But she kind of had that tough love. She's like, if you want a Coke, go get your own Coke. And that
You
kind
wrote
of,
about that, man. Hey, mom, bring me a Coke.
yeah, she says, get your own Coke. So that tough love really ruled my world, and it really kind of defined who I would become later on.
One of the things they told you, it wasn't shared by your favorite nurse. It was shared by another medical personnel of, hey, this child's life is different. It's changed, and make sure you keep this child away from athletics. Keep them safe.
Yeah.
Put them in a bubble.
That was some of the worst advice that I have ever received. But yes, I get that too. They took my parents aside, and the doctor said, he's no longer going to play any sports. He's going to be different. And so you have to protect him. And so, like in FIAD class, I was given the great choice of either keeping score for the other kids or lifting weights. And so that was it. And so
Yeah.
that was always really hard to deal with, because sports as a kid is kind of a big part of your life. And that was taken away from me.
We believe what we're told. It's very rare that we believe something that we were not told. Like
Yeah,
we become the people that those around us inform us that we can ultimately become. So
that's why it's,
as a child, your sister's the athletic one. You're
yeah,
not. I mean, you lost that chance at age 8.
right.
And I find it so ironic that this kid who knew that his athleticism and his dreams of being an athlete were robbed from him finds himself in a hallway hopping down. It's when you're on one leg hopping down the hallway that you finally begin to find the freedom to be who you always were.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think in life, we're given opportunity and sometimes we don't know it. And my opportunity was given to me hopping down that hallway, just trying to go to the bathroom. My leg was hurting one day. And so, this kid stops me. He's like, you're missing your leg. And I'm like, well, yeah, Mr. Einstein, I get this, I am missing my leg. And he goes, well, let's go play wheelchair basketball. And I was like, never heard of such a thing. They play basketball in wheelchairs. What is this?
Jeff,
So
where were you at that time?
so the University of Wisconsin Whitewater. And so luckily we had a wheelchair basketball program there. Didn't know anything about it. I went there because my sister went there. She played on the women's basketball team. And so just there watching her going to school and whatnot. And then, and discovered him. But the odd thing about it is this guy that stopped me in the hallway was another amputee. He was wearing pants. I didn't know that. And so he actually was from Australia. And years later, I got to play in the World Championships and the Paralympics against him. And so that was a cool moment.
As a college student, what percentage of your time would you spend in a wheelchair versus walking around with a prosthetic on?
So no, I would spend every second walking around with my prosthetic. The only time I was in my wheelchair was when I was training or playing wheelchair basketball.
So
So
you are not only learning how to play basketball now in college, you're learning how to roll around in a wheelchair pretty much for the first time.
yeah, it basically was. I mean, I got escorted out of the hospital in the wheelchair, but outside of that, I'd never spent any time there. So yeah.
Uh, so right now, like I could probably take you in a game of horse, but that's about it, man. And it may be not even that. When did you recognize as this college student in a wheelchair rolling around with this Australian, barking orders at you
Right.
that you actually might have a gift?
Yeah, well, I knew my sister was an athlete, right? And so I was like, you know what? I think maybe I could give this a try, and she could come watch me try this sport I'm introduced to. And so the one advantage that I had, I knew going into it, was a work ethic. I have a very strong work ethic, and that just comes from being on a farm. So in The other great thing that happened for me is that I had a great people around me. I think that's the biggest key in life, is to have, good people around you, people that believe in you. And luckily, my first coach, Mike Frogley from Canada, actually took me under his wing and kind of taught me everything about wheelchair basketball. So like you said, I didn't know how to push, didn't know how to pass, I didn't know how to shoot, I didn't know how to do any of that. And then put it all together was pretty incredible.
Can I ask you about Mike? I've read about him before, and he would meet you at the gym at 5 a.m. and spend a couple hours, just the two of you working out together.
Yeah. But right away, I think he did see some talent or potential in me. I was tall, I was in shape, and so I just needed the skills. And I think that he recognized that. And like later on, he would say, me not knowing anything about the sport was actually an advantage for him because I didn't have any bad habits already developed. So he could teach me the proper way right away. And if I listened and had consistency, that I could go wherever I wanted to go, whether that was the top or whether that was just being on the team or a leader or whatever.
Would you talk about trying out for the United States men's national team?
Yeah, so like 18 months after I started playing, every day I was playing against some of the best players in the world. So I had to level up. I remember my first 6 games, I wasn't even allowed to shoot the basket. They were afraid I was going to miss it. So I wasn't allowed to do that. My job was to rebound and play defense. And so I had to learn all the fundamentals and everything like that. But after months of working out on my own, working out with Coach Frogley and the team, that I was getting better and better. And so I received an invitation to U.S. tryouts. There were 100 people invited, so that was cool to get the invitation. But really only 12 people make the team. So it's super competitive. And so right from the beginning, I had a really great camp. And yeah, I was named on the national team, and I was on the national team for 14 years.
We could spend a lot of time spinning our wheels talking about 14 years of rocking and rolling and the impact in the game. Clearly, I think, at least to my mind, the game that probably comes to mind for you is the game where you scored 63 points and rebounded 27 balls. What is going on when you have a game like that? What's different that day than the previous days?
I want to first say that I'm not a ball hog. I did have 1 assist, so that was very, very important. Yeah.
No one likes playing with Jeff. Like, you may win the game as a team, but he's a boring guy to have out there with you because he grabs the rebound, shoots the ball.
Yeah, no, it was one of those days you train for. And it wasn't just about that one day. It was about like 10 or 12 years of hard work to have that one day come to be. But I'm glad that one day happened, but it wasn't about that one day. It was all the work that went into it every single morning at 5 o'clock. All the training that I've done and all the belief in myself, the mental training, all of that. But it came to be in that one day. It's like every time I touched the ball, I knew what I was going to do. Everything was slow. Like they say, being in the zone, that was it to the T. It was like, yeah, it was my day. But I've had several days like that. I've had a few 50-point games and stuff like that. But 63 was high.
It's so awesome. All right, man. So I'm going to kind of spin through part of the bio because apparently you're not just a stud on the court, you're also a warrior off of it. I have read that you were watching television, so I'm glad you at least have a little bit of downtime to chill.
Always.
And you and I have seen the same show. It's the triathlon. It's the Ironman, probably out in Hawaii. When I watched it, I reached into the bag of popcorn and just took another bite, then another bite, then sipped the soda. You watched it and you realized, I want to do that too.
Yeah, I think some of the big motivation for me was that doctor telling me that I couldn't do stuff, telling me I couldn't run, telling me I couldn't play basketball and all of that. And then I saw that program and another just big light just went off. I'm like, why not try to run? Why not try to swim? Why not try to ride a bike? It was a little bit harder than that, our program was, so there's a lot of work that goes into this Ironman. It sounds cool and the tattoos look great, the people that have it, but I don't. But the rest of it it's a lot of hard work. And more than that, it's mentally challenging, draining. And yeah.
It would be for a completely able-bodied fit person, it would be almost impossible. It's an extremely difficult thing. Understand when you started training, after running your first 100 yards, you had to stop.
Yeah.
So this is the length of a football field. This is not very far. You had to stop. Tell our listeners and viewers why, after only 100 yards, you stopped.
Yeah, well, I just received the first running leg that I had. And so it's different to get a running leg on. It's my first time running. I took off and I got to the 100 yards, so excited about, running for the first time. and then took my leg off, and I had a big surprise. It was hurting. I took it off. It was bloody from one end to the other. And so it didn't fit right. It didn't feel right. So you had to go back to the drawing board, if you will, and redesign the leg and come up with a different plan. And then a few weeks later, I made it 200 yards. And so, it's kind of like with life, you start small, you work really hard, and then that consistency will get you to where you want to be. And so, an Ironman, if some of your listeners don't know, is a 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and then a marathon 26.2-mile run. So it's a long way and a long day. And so you have 17 hours to complete it. And then each of the different segments, you have a time cutoff. And if you don't reach that distance by that time cutoff, your day is over, and you're watching the rest of the race. So so you need to be in good shape, mentally, physically, emotionally, all of it.
Tell me why put yourself into a position that's going to cause such pain, that's going to require so many hours of training and blood and tears and sweat and occasionally the failures and the time away from those you love. Like, what is it ultimately that you are pursuing in those races?
Because you told me I couldn't do it, I just think so many times in life that people tell us that we can't do something or we shouldn't do something. And I kind of want to be, I don't know, a role model or a light post, if you will, of, hey, you can do it. It's going to be hard. Some days are going to suck, but you can get after it. And the only thing that's stopping you from that goal or that dream is you. A lot of people, I think, are short-sighted in their potential. They only see, well, my family's only done this. We don't do that. Well, why can't you do that? Do you desire to do that? Do you want to do it? How bad do you want to do it? And so for me, if I get in something, I'm all in. So the second I saw that, I was all in. I was on the next day. I was trying to find a leg maker that could make me my leg that I needed. I was doing all the research I needed on nutrition, tried to find a bike, but I think a way to go about doing that is to find a mentor in everything you do. Like in wheelchair basketball, I had Mike Frogley, my first coach. He was my mentor. He showed me the way I needed to go. And then I found a mentor that did Ironmans before. And, so I learned the way to do it, not the way not to do it. And so it kind of makes a faster learning curve, if you will. So I always encourage someone, if they want to go do a goal or something, find someone that's already done it, ask them what they've done, and see if they'll be your mentor.
Do you have different legs in the 3 different paths of a triathlon?
I do, yeah. So I have a cycling leg, and I also have a running leg. And so overall, I have 13 different legs. Yeah, so I have climbing legs, Everest leg, 3 running legs, and so different legs for different situations. So, it's
not a swimming leg.
No, so that's considered illegal. So, because you could put a fin on the end of it, and you'd be faster than an able-bodied person. So, the legs are kind of expensive, so it's good that I don't have to have an extra leg for swimming.
Tell me where you met your wife, Elizabeth.
So I met her actually in North Carolina. At the time, I was playing wheelchair basketball, and one of my sponsors at the time, Quickie Wheelchairs, they had an event there. My wife was running the event, and so it's called Cycle to the Sea. And so it's a 200-mile hand crank bike where you go 200 miles. And so my sponsor at the time made me come in and do this race. And I'm like, I've never done 200 miles. I've never even been on a hand bike before in my life. And they're like, well, you're in shape. You'll figure it out. And so I was like, okay, so here I am. So I show up at this event. My wife's running it. We start at this Walmart parking lot, and it is downpouring, raining. And my wife brings us all in together, and she goes, due to the rain and safety issues, we're going to move everyone up 5 miles up the road and start there. So me being me, I raise up my hand. I'm like, well, I signed up for 200 miles, not 195. So she kind of just takes a little step back, and she goes, all right, well, you can go around in the parking lot for 5 miles, and we'll load you up. When you're finished, we'll take you with the rest of the group. And so she kind of put me in my place that day, and really kind of every day since. So it's amazing.
When did it go from her being in charge of the race to you being a couple?
To her being in charge of my life? No.
No. Hey, those are your words, man. I'm not going to paint you in that corner.
It's fun. So I was playing wheelchair basketball professionally in Spain. And so she would fly over, like my team would pay for her to come over once a month and just hang out and just be at some of my games and stuff. And so, we had the long distance relationship, and it was great though. We get to learn more about each other. I had to go to the payphones back then, and plug in the quarters or the pesetas back then over in Madrid. So we had to learn each other from a distance, and then later on, a year. I told her, it's kind of a side story, but I've had 2 5-year relationships. And at the end of those 5-year relationships, both of them said, all right, either we get married or we move on. And so both times in those 5-year relationships, I said, well, I think it's time to move on then with the ultimatum. And so I was telling my now wife, Elizabeth, I'm like, well, I usually date people for 5 years, then they give me the ultimatum. And she's, oh, okay. So after a year and a half, I asked her to marry me. Maybe it was just, I found the right one.
As a kid, man, 8 years old, looking to the left and seeing your tennis shoe and your foot sticking out of it under that tractor, dad coming over, picking you up, 47 days in hospital, your heart stops twice, dozens of surgeries, the work, man. Were there times where you wondered, will someone fall in love with this Wisconsin farm boy? Like, am I lovable? Am I enough after what I've been through?
That's a great question, and yes, I worried about that every day until I got married because I am different. It's funny, like even now, I go to the grocery store. I'm with my daughter and my son, a few years ago, and it was the weirdest thing. This lady comes up to me and she goes, "It's so good that you get out,"
Yeah.
and I'm like, "It's so good that I get out." I said, "This is going to the grocery store." I'm like, she doesn't know my story. She just sees that, oh, this poor guy is missing his leg. And so you get the looks, you get the stares, and then sometimes you take that internally. I think early on in my life, I tried to do everything I could to fit in. I wore pants. I had my legs made with cosmetic covers to make them look more real. I did everything I could to fit in. And then when I found wheelchair basketball and other sports, I'm doing everything I can to stand out.
Mm.
I don't wear pants unless I have to. And so, I go to the South Pole, obviously I have to wear them, and then Everest for sure I did. But if I can get away with wearing shorts, I always wear shorts. And now I love it when people come up, especially kids. Hey, can I talk to you about your robot leg? And I'm like, yes, because that's the greatest thing. If they can ask a question, then it means I'm just as normal or even cooler than someone else. And so
Mm.
we talk about the robot leg all the time.
Speaking of children and cool, tell me about your daughter, Grace. She's your firstborn, Elizabeth, and you welcome little Grace. By the way, I married an Elizabeth, and our
Awesome.
first daughter, her name is Grace.
No
So
way.
that about you, I liked you even more, man. But tell me about little Grace.
Yeah, so Grace was born about 8 weeks premature, and so we thought everything was okay. The doctor said that she would catch up and everything would be back to normal. Well, at about 18 months, she started having seizures. And so it was kind of blank seizures, and they gravitated to head drops. She was born, we found out later on, with a rare genetic disorder called mosaic tetrasomy 5P. There's only about 10 known cases in the world. Not the lottery to win, but one we won. And so you have what you have, and you love who you can love. And so with Grace's seizures, it manifests itself with lots of developmental delays and lots of seizures. She was having more than 100 seizures a day. Like, we were catching her like every few minutes from falling on the ground. She had this aura where she'd take a big breath, and then all of a sudden her left arm would start shaking, her left leg would start shaking, and her body would convulse. Then all of a sudden she would have these drop seizures where she would just go blank and just hit the floor. And so, we had to be there to protect her and save her and, make sure she didn't get hurt. And then she'd come out of the seizures, and it was kind of reverse order. Left leg would start shaking, left arm would start shaking, body would start to shake. And then, but the coolest thing about Grace is she's got a great positive attitude. When she was coming out of those seizures, most of the time, you'll see this big, big smile, and she'll say, "I'm okay, I'm okay." And then she'll continue on doing what she was doing before the seizure. I think it's important in life to have adversity role model, or someone that you can look to or find inspiration in or power in. And Grace is definitely that for me. I see resiliency in her, and when I have a bad day, I'm like, yeah, it's really not that bad. But as of 10 months ago, we've had some great news. We've done everything we can to try to help her with those seizures. Even moved to Colorado for 5 years for treatments for her out there. We had a vagal nerve stimulator, a deep brain stimulator put in her brain at Mayo Clinic. And so for about a year and a half, we were trying to play around with the settings. Well, the doctors were, but to try to get the right settings to maybe make this deep brain stimulator work. And then we moved our care to the UAMS in Arkansas, and they admitted her to the hospital and took a bunch of EEG testing over a week period of time with different settings. And then they brought all that data together into a new AI program, and they come
Right.
up with this optimal setting. And from the day that they changed that setting, Grace has been seizure free for 10 months. She's still cognitively very delayed, but we're learning every single day. And so it's really cool not to have to pick her up off the ground every 5 minutes. We see that light in her eyes. We see that joy that she has that was robbed from her early on.
One of the most touching parts of my mom and dad's book, and it's in my mom's voice, but she writes about normal kids, and I'm using finger quotes right now, normal kids all over the place. And then she writes, I recognize the world would judge my little boy as being less than perfect. So I knew that we had to redefine what perfect actually meant. And that
Exactly.
line always just gets me about myself, but really about every child, because who in the world is perfect? I mean, give me a break. It does not exist. And yet you have this little child who 100 times a day is going through seizures. How did she shape the way you redefine what perfect is?
Yeah, well, I grew up not being perfect myself. So I think it was easier on me than it was on my wife. I was always a big advocate. The doctors early on were just saying, put her in a wheelchair, it'll be easier for you to get around. And I'm like, no, we're not putting her in a wheelchair. We're not giving away what we already have, so we're gonna be active. We're gonna be doing as much as we can to as long as we can. I mean, it
Right.
may dictate later on in life that she is in a wheelchair. I don't know, but as of today, she's not, and she's not going to be. And so I think, think a lot of times it was weird. Like my wife had noticed that people were staring because Grace has to wear a helmet, and so people were staring at her. And I think at first it really bothered her. I'm like, well, why did that bother you? We are different. We need to embrace that. If they ask questions, that's great. And so it was. I think it was harder for her, but I've always been one for perfect is not a word. For me, it's kind of funny when I have some of my friends who are like, "Oh, my son got a B yesterday in his report card." I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's some hardship there, buddy." But you know what I mean? Everyone's 100% is their 100%. And so I don't want to be perfect. You know, I,
Right.
I don't strive to be perfect. I just try to be as best as I can and let my daughter be as best as she can. So that's hard.
One of the more beautiful things about your daughter Grace, I think there's a lesson in this not only for you and her, but for all of us, is her seizures before the deep brain stimulation and before you got it just right, tuned in, they would be mitigated when she was doing new activities. And so when you would take her to new places, for instance, hikes, when
Mm-hmm.
she was experiencing something new for the very, very first time, that she was less likely to have a seizure. So my first question is, why do you think that is?
Well, I honestly think that, exercise and movement is the best exercise that we can possibly have. Whether you have seizures or whether, an amputation or back issues, I think movement is our best medicine. I think a lot of times people, just sit and live in the comfort zone. They're afraid to move, they're afraid to do something different. But for Grace, I think it was both mental and physical. I think when her brain was engaged in something new, like our favorite thing was to go rock climbing in a gym. And so it was different because she had to do her mind and her body and like how she moved. And so when she was on the line, if you will, in climbing, she wasn't having seizures. And so
Yeah.
we just figured out like if we can keep her moving, that she would not have as many seizures.
And then through this rock climbing exercise and taking her on hikes, and from the time you were living in Colorado, you bump into some folks who are about to go on their own adventure. And this sets you. One of the things I love about you, Jeff, is your ability to say yes to life. Like whatever it is, like, all right, man, let's go. Let's
Yeah.
just do that. And you're about to say yes to this wild trip, man, to the
Yeah.
Grand Tetons. So first, for our listeners who may not know even what those are, like first describe them, and then what do you want to do with them?
Yeah, so the Grand Tetons is a pretty technical climb in Wyoming at just under 14,000 feet. And so, yeah, I was climbing that same night that Grace and I were first exposed to the rock climbing gym. At the end, they thanked us for coming, and then the leader, he's like, you know what, we've been training all year to climb this Grand Teton climb, and he goes, we're gonna climb it in a couple of days. He goes, we had a teammate fall and break his leg, and he goes, well, we have a spot available. And he goes, I know you've never climbed before. I know you're new to this, but we know you're in good shape and you have a good attitude. So we think we can teach you all the skills you need along the way. So like you said, one of my favorite things is never turn it down an opportunity. I mean, I think opportunities are so important. And I think so many people don't take advantage of those opportunities or don't say yes, if you will.
Mm.
And so I did, and a couple days later, we went and we summited the Grand Teton. It was so scary, but so fun, and I love like learning something new. Being a part of a team, and then reaching that goal. Standing on the summit, and so yeah, it was some of the most amazing views that I've ever had, and something I've been so proud of.
Man, congrats. I mean, it's so beautiful, and I'm glad you did that. And yet then you get the bug. So
Yeah,
your wife was probably hoping that that would not have happened because it's led to you go on these wild adventures, truly all over the world. What is the Explorers Grand Slam?
so the Explorers Grand Slam is the highest peak in all seven continents, as well as skiing to the north and skiing to the South Pole. So I think there's 60 people that have done that. So not too many. It's unique. It's cold. And so in Arkansas right now, it's like 10 degrees. So everyone's like, oh, it's so cold. I'm like, nah, this is nothing. In the South Pole is like minus 35 to 40, pretty common. So yeah,
All
not.
right, so you just kind of doing a little name drop right there. In the South Pole, like who in the world has ever been to the South Pole? You climbed the tallest mountain
Yes.
in our Antarctica. First of all, what was that like?
In Mount Vincent in Antarctica, it was beautiful. Yeah, it was super, super cold and it was really windy. But not a crazy technical mountain by any means, but yeah, a lot of fun and very remote. So if something went wrong, you could be in trouble fast. But that's kind of the joy of climbing. What you do in life, you have consequences. And in the mountains, those consequences, can be really severe. So you try not to make a mistake.
What was the trek like to the South Pole? Because I understand you skied in, and people don't realize the Howard Johnson's is not available halfway there. Like you are on your own, you're pulling your own gear. So what's that journey like?
No Starbucks either along the way, so that's not as good. So yeah, that journey is so weird. So you get dropped in on this plane with skis, and you have about 160 pounds of all of your equipment in this sled. And what you're doing then is, hooking up to a harness. And what we're doing is walking about anywhere from 10 to 14 to 16 hours a day. So I say skiing, you're basically walking in your skis, pulling that 160-pound sled behind you. But the real scary thing is when that plane leaves, you're on your own. You have your team, but then you're kind of on your own. Like you say, there's no, Howard Johnson's or any of that or Starbucks or any restaurant along the way. There's really nothing there. It's flat. It's you look out, and the only thing you can see is snow, and you look above, and the only thing you can see is blue sky and that sun. And the weird thing about it is the sun never goes down.
I know, man, I was excited to ask you about the Southern Hemisphere stars. And then I remembered like he never saw him, at least not on that trip.
Not on that trip. I did not see him at all. So that was kind of really weird to get used to sleeping with. But it was kind of nice. You had all day to do whatever you wanted. So you didn't have to worry about like the sun going down to be extra cold and things like that. So, but the weird thing about that trip, and I learned a ton, is to make sure you know your teammates because we were there. We had, when you first get to these big groups and you don't know your team, you kind of have like a beer or whatnot, you talk about what you've done, like your resume, if you will. And so everyone's talking, and all of a sudden we get to my teammate, and she's like, well, I'm like, I summited Everest, did all those 7 summits, all that, and then, the rest of it. And then I'll get to my teammate, and she goes, well, I'm a trust fund baby. I can do whatever I want. And so I'm looking at my teammate that I've climbed Everest with. I'm like, oh no, I hope she didn't get with our subgroup. And then, moments later, we're on a plane and we find out that she's in our subgroup of four. And yeah, we take off with our 160 pounds and we look back and we see my teammate hasn't moved the start line. She can't pull her sled. And so we have to go back, get her, take 20 to 30 pounds, put it in my sled, take it
Gosh.
in my teammate's sled, and take it in someone else's sled. And so, yeah, the whole time it felt like we were babysitting because she didn't really have the experience. She would come out without her gloves on or, drop things and we'd have to go back for them. And so it's really important to know, your team.
So, I mean, what do you do with that? Like, how do you, in real time,
Yeah.
because there are no parents arriving, the trust fund is closed for business right now because we are on the South Pole moving forward
Yep.
and the cavalry is not coming. So you've got to deal with this, man, but you can't leave her behind because that's
Yep.
akin to murder.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, she's got to pull her weight. So to walk me through that.
Yeah, so like you said, there's nothing we can do about it. So the sad thing about it is like you train for 160 pounds. Well, at least I did and my teammates did, but she didn't. And so when she got there, she couldn't move the sled. And that was a problem. So we had to do the only thing we could do is divide the weight up equally and then go from there. So basically she was pushing an empty sled. But the worst part about it is like she didn't really have like her camp system stuff down. So we'd have to, all right, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to, and so it was challenging. But like you say, once you're past that no-go point, she was on our team. And so we have to deal, you can be the strongest teammate one day, you can be the weakest teammate one day, but try not to start out being the weakest teammate, be prepared. So that's why I've always learned going forward in any mountain I ever climb or any team that I'm ever a part of, I want to vet who is on that team because if they don't have the necessary skills, abilities, or desires, I really don't want to be a part of it. I want to have the best team possible. I want to trust my teammate.
You did not meet me at this point, but I met you at this point about 9 years ago or so when you graced the front of the Sports Illustrated. It's an epic shot. It's a beautiful cover. It's an incredible story. Will you tell our listeners why you were on the front of Sports Illustrated?
Yeah, I was on the front of Sports Illustrated because I was the first American amputee to summit Mount Everest. And so it was really cool. Like all of a sudden I got this phone call and they're like, hey, we're going to come and we're going to do a photo shoot or an interview and a photo shoot for Sports Illustrated. So I'm like, I've been on, I was thinking to myself, I've already been on Sports Illustrated, like in the small little article. I'm like, no, you don't need to send anybody. We just do this interview on the phone. I can send you one of my pictures. And they're like, no, you don't understand. I'm like, well, what? And they're like, well, you're going to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And then they came out and did this. Yeah, it was for me kind of the biggest full circle moment.
Yeah.
Because I was always told I couldn't play sports. And then being on the cover of Sports Illustrated, one of the largest sporting magazines in the world, that was pretty an aha moment, if you will. Yeah, a lot of fun.
Hey, brother, we're about to move toward the finish line together. But before I let you slide forward into life, you've been able to party with The Rock. This is something not everybody can claim that I've had on my podcast, but you can. First, tell me why The Rock reached out to you.
Well, they did the movie. It's called Skyscraper. And he played the main character in there, and he was an amputee. So they heard about me through HBO Real Sports, because I was on that with Brian Gumbel, and then through being on the cover of Sports Illustrated. But they brought me in to kind of mentor The Rock on what it was like to be an amputee. So I got to go there and, he'd ask any questions about being an amputee. If you've seen the movie where he's on the crane jumping onto the skyscraper, I actually got to yell action and cut. And so that was really neat. But the biggest thing I learned about that trip is like, he's an amazing individual. He's 6'5", 260 pounds, but just an amazing human being. The cool thing about him is like, he did his research and he found out about Grace. And he goes, tell me about Grace, what's she into? And I said, well, oddly enough, her favorite movie is Moana. And he took my phone and he sang to Grace in the Maui voice from the movie. And so it was really touching. But he is, you see him in the movies, how fun and jovial and cool he is. In person, he's 10 times that, just a genuine human being. It's really cool.
Not all of us have had The Rock sing to us on the phone. Not all of us have partied with him in Vancouver. Not all of us have climbed the Himalayas or made it to the South Pole or found love.
Yeah.
You've done these things, but for our listeners right now who are feeling like you might have felt when you were 8, stuck and less than, and just they're just wrestling a little bit forward in life. What's the encouragement for them as they sit here as we get ready to wrap up our time together?
I think the encouragement is it's just take one step at a time. Like whether you're climbing Mount Everest or whether you're trying to find a significant other or whether you're going after a 5K goal, it's really, you need to be focused on that next step forward, whether it's just setting that alarm a little bit earlier so you get up and get your workout in or do meditation or whatever it is. But I think it's the small steps that really become the big results. And so many people are afraid to take that first step. I could be one of those people that looked at that TV and said, yeah, I want some more popcorn. Or it could be one of those people that say, you know what? I want to see if I can learn how to run. I might not be able to, I might not be the fastest, but what if I can run? What if I can do that? What if I can accomplish that goal? What if I can summit Mount Everest? What if I can be a good dad?
Final question before we shift into the Live Inspired. There's a book that you wrote that came out a few years ago called The Gift of a Day. Describe the cover to our listeners and viewers and tell us why it matters to you, the cover in particular.
Yeah, the cover is crossing the finish line at an Ironman, and so in that picture, it's me and my daughter Grace. And so the cool thing about that is, I've been told, and she's been told that you can't do things in life, and so to have her, be there with me, I just think that so many people are told that they can't do something, and to share that moment with her is so special because in life there's going to be goals, but if you believe it in your mind and in your heart and you take that first step forward, I really believe you can accomplish anything. And there's no better feeling of accomplishment to have the people you love with you right there with you. And so it was really cool to share that moment with her and the rest of my family when I got home. So it was pretty awesome.
Man, if that happened to be me crossing that finish line, that picture would be blown up in several different spots around my house and office. I just
It
think
is. It is. It
it's
is.
so perfect, man. Here's this massive physical accomplishment, emotional, mental accomplishment, professional accomplishment. But what makes it so worthy is there's this little precious girl at the finish line reaching up, looking up at her dad. It's priceless.
It's all about being a role model. And I think we can all be that, whether we have a challenge or whether we don't, And so if you can be a mentor and have a mentor, life is going to be so much better for you.
Jeff, we're gonna roll now into the Live Inspired 7, man. So get your running leg on. You're gonna need it for these 7.
I'm going to grab it.
Question number 1, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
It's called Inner Game, but it's a book on mental imagery and like how to go through processes in tennis. And so I've used that in wheelchair basketball. I think that the mental part of sports and life are so important. Like waking up and thinking there's 100 people or 1,000 people cheering you on. They're either cheering you on or booing you on. And I think it's that whatever you believe that they're doing is an actual that happens. So it's called the inner game.
What's one positive characteristic, one beautiful trait you possessed as a little kid growing up in a farm in Wisconsin that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
That's a good one. I was going to say competition, but I still am a competitive dude. So I don't think there is one. I think I've never changed. I think I've been exposed to different things, and what I have is what I am. So I would say nothing.
It's awesome. And in almost every other case, I'd say you are a liar or you're unaware. But in your case, man, as you take the hand of your daughter Grace and keep climbing mountains, that little boy is still within the man in front of me. So if
Sure,
your
never
home caught fire and all living things and people are out, and you have an opportunity of running in and grabbing one item, what's that one physical thing you would grab from that house?
I don't need anything. I
Let
really
it burn.
Yeah, let it burn.
Grab the marshmallows, man. Let's go.
Yeah.
If you could sit on a bench, I know you don't sit there often, but if indeed you could sit on a bench and have a nice long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be seated next to?
That's easy. My dad. Yeah.
Anything left unsaid between you and your dad? I know you tried to have some probing conversations and man to man, but was there anything you wish you had said?
Just being there, see how things are, and reconnect.
What's the best advice your dad, mom, your favorite nurse, Elizabeth, Grace, anybody else ever gave you? So the best advice you've ever received is,
Yeah, that's easy from my dad. When I was having a hard time when I was 14 years old about other people looking at me and and see that I was different, my dad took me aside and he said, "Son, you can either choose to be pitiful or you can choose to be powerful, but you can't be both." And so,
what's good, man? So your
yeah,
dad may not have been able to have the conversation with you about that day, but he had it with you every day afterwards
every day
in
afterwards,
different
yeah.
ways.
So on Everest, when I was struggling, and I thought, can I do this? And then those words came flooding into my mind. I'm like, yeah, I can do this, and he's with me. Yeah.
What advice would you give yourself at age 20?
The same advice I give myself right now is work ethic wins over talent any single day. I think in today's age, I think the work ethic is maybe not as strong as it was in our generation or the generation of my dad. But I just think if you have that work ethic, that trait, that you can truly accomplish anything.
Jeff Glasbrenner, you've almost made it to the finish line. You've almost summited the 7 peaks of Live Inspired. Here comes the seventh, man, the
All
most
right, great.
difficult. It has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like your sentence to read?
This guy lived his life full of passion, purpose.
Jeff Glassbrenner indeed did live his life with passion and purpose. He embraced the gift of each day, and he shared that gift not only with his bride and 2 babies, but with a world badly in need of it. Jeff, I want to thank you for moving forward, man. I want to thank you for not being defined negatively by something you went through as a kid.
Appreciate the opportunity.
My friends, that is the voice and the life story of a man named Jeff Glassbrenner. You can learn more about him by reading the book, The Gift of a Day. My name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift. Live inspired. Well, my friends, from time to time, we leave these interviews more certain than ever that there are more things available for us to do in our lives, whether it's mountains to climb, races to run, lives to lead, individuals to impact, businesses to build, forgiveness to be given away, but something to do. And I think when you leave this episode with Jeff, it's not necessarily, unless you are a little bit more bold than I, about running 25 Ironmen or about climbing Everest or about going to the South Pole. It might just be about taking the next right step in your journey. So that's my takeaway from today. What is the next right step for you to take on that journey forward of your life? One of the things Jeff said to us that sticks with me is there could not be a greater disservice that a parent could do to a child than to treat them as if they are disabled, to make them less than they actually are. In what areas of life we may be doing that to others, and in what areas of life are we may be doing it to ourselves? Let's be liberated from that today. Let's be bold and grabbing our boots, going to work, and beginning to climb forward in life. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you, you might also enjoy the interview we did a couple years ago with my friend Allison Levine. Allison's awesome. We've spoken at several conferences together. She also is a mountain climber. So if you need to get your mountain climbing fixed, if you want to learn a little bit more about Everest, one of the things I enjoyed so much about that conversation with Allison is that before she succeeded, she failed. But she failed knowing that she was willing to give up this time because she wanted to have a chance at the next time. So we can fail forward in life. And if you want to learn more about that and Everest, check it out at episode 390. So at episode 390 on the Live Inspired podcast, or by cruising with me at johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. We will have in the show notes a link to Allison's conversation with us. My friends, I so enjoy being on this journey forward in life with you. I've enjoyed walking alongside of you on this episode. You could do me a big favor right now. If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with someone that you work with, worship with, work out with, that you check out the Live Inspired podcast, and so should they. Text them right now this episode, and not only will they benefit from it, I know they will, but also you will benefit from the conversation the two of you have together. I look forward to the next time together with you. So for this time and until next time, my name, fellow mountain climbers, is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift it is. Live inspired. Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son, Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.